HP Lion's Pride PT8. Draco sat before his once favorite teacher, who was absolutely seething with anger. In all his years at Hogwarts, Draco had never once seen Professor Snape so livid. The sallow-skinned man was pacing back and forth in front of his desk muttering about Draco's stupidity. Draco was far too busy trying to figure out how he had ended up in Snape's office when his plan had been so perfect. Of all the idiotic, harebrained ideas, you very nearly cost us everything, Draco. What exactly were you trying to accomplish? Snape glared at his once favorite pupil. Draco only stared up at his head of house. Snape couldn't even wait for the boy to respond before he began ranting again. I thought after that stupid stunt last year with that revulsion potion episode, you would at least have the frame of mind to leave the girl alone. I'm beginning to think you're obsessed with green grass, and right now, you can't afford any distractions. You have much bigger things to be getting on with, don't you think? Draco remained silent. He was barely containing his anger. The plan had been flawless. He had worked very hard and made sure everything was accounted for. It had taken a full month of hard work and immense patience to perfect the polyjuice potion. He had managed to get his hands on the necessary hairs, and then had to wait for the opportunity to present itself. It finally had, and Draco was not about to waste it. Now, your job is to make sure neither of them come back here for a full hour, Draco told Crabbe and Goyle. They were idiots, but he trusted them to do as they were told. Though he would have preferred Nott's help on this, as Theodore was far more capable of subterfuge and distraction. Not to mention handy with his wand. He'd have been able to keep Greengrass and her sister busy while he searched for the luck potion. Unfortunately, Nott was serving detention with Flitwick that evening, so he had to task the job to Crabbe and Goyle. Draco had filled a vial with polyjuice and added the younger Greengrass's hair, and watched it turn a warm shade of violet. Then, he proceeded with his cronies in tow to locate both Greengrass girls to make sure they wouldn't burst in on him while he searched for the tiny vial that would enable him to accomplish what he must. Daphne was in the library with Potter and the rest of the Gryffindor idiots. Tracy Davis was not with them, but Draco figured if the blonde was in her dorm, he could just pretend that Daphne had given him permission, as Astoria, to get something from her trunk. Astoria was a bit harder to find. After having staged Crabbe to watch over Daphne and make sure she didn't go anywhere near her dorm until he returned, Draco and Goyle began their search for the more Slytherin of the two Greengrass girls. It turned out that Astoria was playing some stupid muggle game with other third years on the Quidditch pitch. Goyle was stationed in a place where he could watch, and not draw attention to himself, and Draco headed back to the Slytherin common room, where everything was waiting for him. He'd sent home for some of his old clothing. As Astoria, he was going to shrink a bit, as the girl was smaller than he was. And it would look very strange if she was walking around in clothes that were too big for her. Another problem appeared when he had taken the potion. Two of them, actually. As it turned out, Astoria was rather well built in the chest. Cursing at his oversight, Draco used his current shirt and jumper, while he slipped on his pants from second year, and threw his cloak on over it all. He had no time to waste. It was a very strange thing to walk out of his dorm as Astoria Greengrass. He cursed his lack of knowledge of the female form, though he'd examined Pansy many times. He now began to really appreciate girls' bodies. It felt awkward just to try to walk as he did normally. Draco thanked the founders for their design in building the castle, and especially how the dorms were set. He didn't need to go out into the common room to get to the girls' dorms. His only concern was whether or not the wards protecting the girls' dorms would activate. He breathed a huge sigh of relief when he made it inside the sixth-year girls' dorm and found it deserted. He quickly began opening each trunk to determine the owner of each. He felt a slight sickening feeling when he found Pansy's and saw she had quite a collection of pictures of him. She also had scribbled hearts with her name and his in the middle. Pathetic. He sneered, slamming the lid shut. The next trunk was that huge cow, Bulstrode's. Draco couldn't help but snicker. He had heard that she was now on some sort of diet, and even claimed to have had some kind of tryst while in Bulgaria or somewhere. He couldn't believe she thought running around, and eating rabbit food was going to make boys want her. She'd be better off trying to make it with Eloise Midgen. Next was Tracy Davis. This was rather interesting, as Tracy apparently favored very sexy and slinky undergarments. In fact, it distracted Draco for a bit as he pawed over the silks and satins. He thought for a bit that it all belonged to Daphne, until he found a few letters from Davis' parents. It was too bad that Tracy came from such a low-standing family. The Davises could only trace back the purity for 7 or 8 generations, and had very little in the way of gold. Had her lineage been a bit better, Draco thought it would be very nice to get her to model some of her sexier lingerie for him in private. With only one trunk left, Draco began his search in earnest. He was once again startled to find that, like her best friend, Daphne favored very appetizing undergarments. He was very thorough with his search of her clothing. He didn't wish to miss that little vial hidden in a pair of tights or a bra. Once he was sure that she hadn't hidden the vial of Felix Felicius in her clothing, he began sorting through the rest of her belongings. Books, letters, keepsakes. Everything came out of Daphne's trunk as he sought for that elusive little vial. With every item that passed his inspection, his frustration began to mount. Time was running out, and the liquid luck did not seem to be in her trunk. Once Draco had tossed aside the last scrap of parchment, he went to the small table beside her bed. Every student had one of these next to their bed to keep their glasses, or small pictures on. He ripped open the little drawer and rifled through Daphne's pictures and jewelry. "Astoria, what are you doing in here?" Daphne Greengrass' voice rang out. Draco turned to look at Daphne, who was staring in utter shock and horror at the disaster in her dorm room. She was looking at her belongings and back to her younger sister, who looked horror-struck. "I was just..." Draco began to stammer, trying to come up with some excuse to explain everything as Astoria. "What are you talking about, dork?" "I'm right." Astoria Greengrass slipped through the door just behind her older sister, her eyes suddenly becoming as large as dinner plates. The younger Greengrass stared for a moment at her mirror image before shrugging her shoulders and looking at her sister. "My mistake. Apparently I am in here, and I'm wearing really awful. Are those boys' clothes?" Draco's plan fell apart right in that moment. His mind froze as he stared at the girls. Daphne began trying to retrieve her wand, as her sister did the same. Draco did the only thing he could think of and ran straight at the girls, screaming as he stormed them. He managed to knock Astoria over, and Daphne tripped him up. Draco spilled onto the hard, unforgiving stone floor, and quickly got his feet under him. He still had a few minutes left before the potion wore off. Perhaps if he could find some place to hide, he might be able to get away with his plan. Incarcerus. Fuck. Draco screamed as he felt magical ropes wrap around his arms and legs. He landed on his face, and felt his nose crack on the floor. Blood began to pour from his nostrils, and Draco knew he was done for. Thankfully, it had been Snape who Astoria had gone to fetch upon her sister's plea for a teacher. Once the polyjuice wore off and it was discovered that it was Draco, Snape released him from the bindings and led him to his office. Many people laughed as he was not allowed to go put on proper fitting pants. The ones he had been wearing had not survived Draco's return to his normal form and had split quite obviously, leaving no guesses as to what kind of underwear he preferred. The only thing redder than his Speedos was his face. All through Snape's raving, Draco wondered where his two flunkies had gone and how they had screwed up so simple a task. Even more disturbing was what had become of the little vial of potion. Had she already used it? It seemed incredibly likely. Draco tried not to imagine what the bitch had wasted it on. Some meaningless rendezvous with Potter? This, of course, led his mind to imagine Potter pawing at his soon-to-be prize, as she writhed and panted, wearing some of the more interesting pieces he had found in her trunk. "Are you even listening to me?" Snape snarled. Draco looked up at the man he now considered weak and useless and gave a very pronounced glare. Snape leaned over him, his long hooked nose nearly touching Draco's. "You're walking a very dangerous edge here, boy. You were not chosen because of your power, but your assumed ability to get close to the headmaster. Why don't you just give me my punishment so that I can get back to work on my mission?" Draco sneered. "You are being careless. I still don't understand why you had to rifle through the girl's belongings. Explain it to me. What exactly does green grass have to do with your mission? Please, tell me, because for the life of me, I can't figure out what on earth possessed you to do that. You are supposed to be keeping a low profile, and not drawing attention to yourself." Draco stood up, and absent-mindedly flattened the wrinkles on his robes, forgetting for a moment he was still in torn pants with his rather obnoxious underwear on display. Even Snape's recoil at the sight didn't faze him as he cast a superior glare at the former potions master. "I know what I'm doing, and I don't need you or anyone else. I can do this on my own." Snape simply returned the glare. After a moment of staring, Snape relented and crossed his arms. 3 weeks detention with me, starting tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We will be discussing your plan, Draco. You will not be making this mistake again." Draco stared hard into his head of house's cold black eyes for another moment before turning on his heel and marching out of Snape's office and back to his common room where he planned on reminding both Crabbe and Goyle about loyalty. "Good morning." Daphne smiled as she sat down next to her boyfriend for breakfast. "Hey. So, what did Astoria need so badly last night?" Harry asked, looking up as his girlfriend sat herself next to him. Both Hermione and Neville looked up with curiosity. "It hasn't happened yet, has it?" Tracy Davis asked as she quickly sat on Harry's other side, staring at the Slytherin table. Daphne thought it odd behavior, as Tracy normally sat with her back to the Slytherin table. Daphne had never questioned it, but her friend had always made it a point to sit facing away from their own house table. "What?" Hermione asked, looking thoroughly puzzled. "Good, he's still there." "Oh, this is going to be so good," Tracy said, clapping her hands and squealing with excitement. "What's going on?" Neville looked to Harry, who could only shrug in confusion. Harry turned back to Daphne. "Are you going to tell me what happened? Oh. Everyone turned to look at Tracy, who was on the edge of her seat, nearly halfway across the table. Everyone turned to try and see what she was looking at. "Damn." Tracy sighed, and fell back into her seat. "Tracy, honey, do you want to fill us in on what we're waiting for?" Hermione asked, looking very frightened. "Something wonderful." Tracy grinned, which made Hermione shiver involuntarily. "Have you told them yet?" Astoria asked, taking a seat next to Neville, who smiled in greeting. Astoria nudged him playfully with her shoulder, and then focused her attention on her older sister. "I was just about to," Daphne said, then turned to their friends to tell them all that had happened the previous evening. Daphne had been studying with all of them in the library, when Astoria had come in looking for her. "Daphne, can we talk? You know, Privately. Daphne looked up, and her heart caught. She had never before seen her younger sister looking so nervous. Astoria was dirty and sweaty, the knees of her jeans stained green. Daphne figured she must have been out playing football again. Ever since the previous year, Tori had become increasingly obsessed with the game, and had organized more than a handful of games. Sure. Daphne said, closing her book, and getting up. This might take a while. Tori said, looking a bit grim, and apologetic. Daphne took the hint and packed up her books, gave Harry a quick kiss and followed her sister out of the library. I'm sorry about this. Tori gave a weak smile as they exited the library. But I just need someone to talk to, but I don't want to do it in front of everyone. I mean, I know I can trust Harry and the others, but sometimes you just need a sister. Daphne asked, arching an eyebrow. Tori gave another weak smile and nodded. She didn't say any more but led her sister down to the Slytherin common room. The entire journey, Daphne was lost in her thoughts, wondering what could possibly be troubling her vivacious sister, when it suddenly hit her like a rampaging Hungarian horntail. Boys. Suddenly, Daphne couldn't stop smiling as thoughts of revenge began flashing in her mind. Going up to the young man and asking why he didn't just go out with her sister, as it was such a simple thing. Or stalking Tori and her intended and shouting out inappropriate things just to prevent them from sharing their first kiss. Even the thought of badgering her younger sister about her most intimate secrets almost made her burst out laughing. Daphne led the way to her dorm with Astoria trailing just behind her. Everything stopped when she opened the door and saw her younger sister tearing through her bedside table. Her clothes, books, and personal items were strewn about the room, and the Astoria in her dorm looked like she was about to be sick. Astoria, what are you doing in here? Daphne asked. I was just. The Astoria in her dorm looked really frightened and ready to bolt, while behind her, Astoria began slipping into the room. What are you talking about, dork? I'm right. Astoria stopped short when she spotted herself looking quickly between Daphne and herself. She took in the scene in front of her, trying to comprehend what exactly she was seeing. My mistake. Apparently I am in here, and I'm wearing really awful. Are those boys' clothes? The Astoria before them suddenly looked down at herself and then back up. She gave a loud war cry before stampeding at them. Astoria found herself knocked to the ground as her doppelganger pushed her over. Thankfully, Daphne had somehow managed to trip the imposter up and got her wand out of her robes. Incarcerus. Fuck. The faux Astoria screamed as she fell to the ground trapped in magical ropes. Go get a teacher. Daphne said urgently. Astoria nodded and took off to find help. Daphne approached the now restrained imposter, kneeling beside her. Who are you and what are you doing going through my stuff? Daphne demanded, pushing the tip of her wand into the fake Astoria's face. The girl grunted and strained to get free, but Daphne had perfected the spell over the summer. How are you so sure that I'm not your sister? The fake asked. Boy, if you even have to ask that, you really didn't do your homework before impersonating her. Plus, the clothes, not a really good disguise. First, it's Sunday, and Tori never wears her uniform on the weekend, and second, she prefers skirts. Daphne smirked. Then, Daphne noticed something strange. The girl's hair began to lighten from Astoria's dark brown to a familiar shade of blonde. It was also shortening, and the girl actually began to grow. The pants the girl was wearing began to rip as her legs grew. In another few minutes, she was staring at Draco Malfoy. You. What is going on? Daphne looked up as Astoria returned with Snape in tow. Snape looked quite confused as to why Draco Malfoy was tied up on the ground with his pants torn up. "Sir, we just caught him in my dorm room going through my things. He was disguised as my sister, and he just turned back. I think he was using polyjuice potion," Daphne said quickly. She got to her feet, and Snape stared hard at her for a moment. Daphne thought she felt something pushing inside her head for half a second, then it vanished. "Was anything taken?" Snape asked. Daphne's brain kick-started, and she looked back into her room. "I haven't had the chance to look yet." "Might I suggest that you do so now?" Snape remarked coldly. Daphne turned and went into her dorm, and began going through her things. Astoria came in and started helping her sister pick things up. It appeared that everything was still there. "Everything seems to be here, sir," Daphne said, coming back out. Snape had stood Draco up, and removed the boy's bonds, though he was keeping a firm hold on him so he couldn't slither off. "Very well. I suggest you clean things up, while Mr. Malfoy and I go speak about getting into things that do not belong to him." Daphne watched as Snape began bodily pushing Draco out through the common room, and she heard more than a few people snicker at Draco's bright red bikini briefs. "What the hell was he doing in here going through your stuff? And where did you get all this naughty stuff? Has Harry seen you in any of this?" Astoria grinned, twirling a pair of silky purple panties around her finger. "Give me those," Daphne snapped, snagging her underwear from her sister. "And I don't know what that disgusting little ferret was doing in here." Then, something occurred to her. She did have something that many people would covet. Something most people might kill over. Something that promised to grant wishes, in a manner of speaking. "I think he might have been after this," Daphne said, reaching into her shirt. "Oh, I don't need to see yours, I have my own set." Tori feigned disgust. "Not those, moron. This." Daphne held the vial of golden liquid in her hand. She had fashioned a necklace out of a thin cord of leather and had kept it with her at all times. She reasoned that they might find themselves in a situation where they needed it, and wasn't about to be unprepared for that contingency. "What is it?" Tori asked. "Something that may help Harry when the time comes." "Contraceptive potion." "Ah! What is wrong with you?" Daphne shrieked. "What did you want anyway?" "Huh? You dragged me away from my friends because you needed to talk to me about something, remember? And, not that I'm ungrateful, as we managed to catch Ferret Boy doing whatever he was doing in here, but what was so important?" "Oh, right. Yeah." Tori's bravado slipped away, as she slumped onto her sister's bed and watched her putting her things away. I want to know how to tell if I'm in love." "What?" Daphne stopped folding her clothes to stare at her younger sister. "Well, you've been with Harry a long time now, and I figured you're the best person to ask. It's clear to everyone that you're in love, I just wanted to know how you know." "Tori? Is there a reason you're asking about this?" "I don't think they want to hear about that," Astoria said, cutting her sister off. "You really think Draco was after the luck potion?" Hermione asked conspiratorially. "Either that or my underwear. He could have got more than a few pairs, given how he'd thrown them about." "You." Tracy shuddered. "That is just so wrong. I can't even stomach the thought of that maggot going through my underwear. It's just so wrong. Given what he was wearing, I imagine some of the things you own he'd be quite comfortable in." Daphne smirked. "What about you two boys?" Tracy said with a wicked grin. "What do you got under your pants?" "Neville wears boxers," Hermione said without thinking. Daphne, Astoria, and Tracy all stared at her, each wearing identical grins. I mean that he... Hermione stammered, her face burning crimson. How do you know that, Hermione? Tracy goaded. The girls were all smirking at the bushy hair witch, who had buried her face in her arms. How long has she known your preference for boxers, Neve? Daphne quipped. Neville, who matched Hermione's crimson color, looked between Tracy and Daphne before suddenly reaching for his goblet and draining it. Harry was sure there wasn't more than a swallow or two left in the golden cup, but Neville just kept drinking and drinking. Oh. 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 Do it. Come on. Tracy was leaning forward again and staring across the great hall. Come on, just drink your damn juice. Who are you talking to? Harry asked, befuddled. Blaise. Tracy smiled evilly. I thought you liked him. Neville said, looking terribly confused. Tracy colored a bit but shook her head. Why are you staring at him? What's going on? Hermione asked, poking her head up from her arm cocoon. Vengeance will be mine. Tracy whispered. Yes. Across the great hall, Blaise Zabinai had just taken a sip of his pumpkin juice and set down the goblet to return to conversing with his girlfriend. So, what's supposed to happen? Harry asked, watching Blaise along with the rest of his friends. Wait for it? Tracy was grinning madly. Blaise shook his hand suddenly, scratching the back of it. He then shook his head. He shook out his hand again, flexing it. He suddenly looked at his hand and shot up from his seat. Yes. Tracy shouted, pumping her fist. Thankfully, her shout of triumph was buried under a sudden burst of shouts from the Slytherin table. Blaise stood up from the ground, his face erupting in angry boils. Those closest to him began to laugh and point. It took a bit before Harry and his friends could see why, as they were too far away, but it soon became very clear what was happening. Blaise's pants were becoming very tight around the crotch, until the sound of cloth tearing became apparent. Blaise was doubling over, as parts of him that weren't meant to grow continued to do so. His pants finally gave way, and everyone could see that, like Neville, Blaise preferred boxers. It appeared that someone had the foresight to put some kind of stretching charm on the boys' underwear, as they had yet to rip as Blaise's boy parts grew to the size of automobile tires. Blaise was unable to stand any more and fell onto his back screaming, more in terror rather than pain, though Harry guessed the boils would be rather painful. Those look like silk. Daphne remarked, trying not to laugh too hard, and finding it difficult. Are those dragons on his shorts? Gods, I hope I never piss you off. Neville said, unable to disguise his awe. I have to write those Weasley boys and thank them. And Dobby is getting a boatload of new socks. Tracy howled with laughter. You got Dobby to help? Harry asked, awestruck. I told him you'd want him to help me, and he was more than happy to slip the activator potion in Blaise's goblet for me. If he hadn't drank his juice, nothing would have happened. Tracy said, wiping tears from her eyes. What exactly did you do to him? Harry asked, smiling even though he was a little worried for the dark-skinned Slytherin. Harry didn't really know the boy, but he had been a part of the last year, that had made him all right in Harry's book. Tracy had spoken about him over the summer, though it had all stopped when they got back to school. He knew something had happened, though he figured, given how Blaise was now rarely seen without a certain girl in his company, that he already had a girlfriend when Tracy had spoken to him on the train. Well, I asked Fred and George to give me some supplies. They sent me a care package of powders and salves to put on his clothes. One particular powder caught my eye. They said it was a sort of engorgement thing. It is terribly easy to get into the boys' dorms and put things on their clothing, you know. I also put some stuff to give him boils and he's going to have a lot of difficulty relieving himself for a while. Also, he's going to be terribly itchy. All of it starting to work when he drank the activator potion in his pumpkin juice. You are truly wicked. Astoria grinned. You must teach me. How long is he going to? Hermione made a motion with her hands to indicate Blaze's rather large problem. The boy in question was now being escorted out of the Great Hall by Snape, who looked murderous, and Flitwick, who appeared to be having trouble keeping his face straight. Why did he deserve that anyway? Harry wondered. Tracy's mirth melted a bit, and she gave a weak smile to Harry. Let's just say that he should have apologized to me for something instead of making me feel like a complete and utter slag, and that after this, I have no more issues with him, okay? Harry nodded, and then looked to Daphne, who gave a small shrug. He started to ask her what was going on, but she quickly shook her head. Harry was not an idiot by any stretch of the imagination, but he knew that in this instance he was quite clueless. One day, he would learn the full story, and he knew on that day, he might have to speak to Blaze himself. After all, Tracy was family, and you simply did not mess with Harry's family. So, you really mean to take him there? Tonight? Snape asked, as Dumbledore collected his traveling cloak. The old man smiled as he nodded. In just a few minutes, in fact. Dumbledore smiled, then his face became reflective and sad. It is long past time. Besides, he will need to know the area. Seems like a true waste of time. He needs much more training. It's a waste of his and your time. He could easily go there on his own when it's all over. When there's no risk of getting killed. Snape said, staring pointedly at the headmaster. Has anything changed? Dumbledore turned to look pointedly at his defense teacher, who shook his head quickly. I am unaware of any changes, that doesn't mean that he hasn't posted a spy there. Dumbledore gave a small smile and finished fastening his cloak. I believe Harry and I will be quite safe tonight. I do wish you would reconsider and join us. We've been over this 100 times, Albus, and I've told you every time, he does not need to know just how responsible I am for what's happened to him. Our relationship is very simple. He hates me and I loathe him. There is no reason to complicate things. Oh, Severus. The headmaster sighed. I wish more than anything in this world you would trust that Harry would understand you better if you simply. Enough. Snape shouted. This subject is closed, and I wish you would stop trying to reopen that wound. I will do my duty, and then. Snape drifted off, turning his eyes to the table where a dozen delicate silver instruments sat, whirring and puffing smoke. Dumbledore shook his head sadly as he stared at his defense teacher. Both men were pulled from their musings when a soft knock startled them back to reality. Come in. Dumbledore said. Harry Potter opened the door, looking ready for a journey. He had been asked by the headmaster to bring his invisibility cloak as well as a good warm jacket. Ah, Harry, right on time as usual. Where are we going, sir? Have you located a Horcrux? Harry asked hopefully. Dumbledore couldn't help but smile at the young man's enthusiasm. Given the life the boy was trying to build for himself, Dumbledore couldn't fault Harry's rush to be rid of the Dark Lord. Dumbledore often felt the same feelings of longing for peace. I am afraid not yet. But not to worry, I am sure we will locate on quite soon. Tonight, you and I will be making a much more important journey. One I should have taken you on many years ago. Shall we? Harry nodded and turned to leave, with both Snape and Dumbledore following. What about the feast, Sir? Harry asked over his shoulder. I think the rest of the school will be fine without me for one Halloween. Dumbledore chuckled a bit. Harry gave a slight grin and continued on through the castle until he reached the entrance hall. Somewhere on the journey, Snape had disappeared, which Harry was thankful for. The man had become, if possible, nastier to be around. Harry had held 3 meetings, and Snape had done his best to ruin it for everyone by questioning Harry's teaching techniques. However, at the last meeting, a few students, led by Neville, had reminded him that they were not in his classroom, asked the greasy-haired git to kindly shut his trap so they could learn something. Snape had not been very happy, and Gryffindor had lost 50 points. No one seemed to care after they heard the story. Dumbledore led Harry out on the grounds and down to the front gates in silence. Harry was burning with curiosity, wondering exactly where they were going, and what the purpose was of tonight's excursion. They passed through the gates and walked a little further on before Dumbledore stopped and turned to Harry. At our last lesson, I told you that I was quite proud of your progress. You are finding my magic more and more easy to find. Tonight, I shall be taking you someplace and asking you to feel for other people's magic. I think you will find it very interesting, and more than a little important to you. If you are ready, take a hold of my arm. Harry nodded, and grasped the headmaster's arm and found himself being squeezed almost at once. He was becoming quite used to it, as he operated with the headmaster more and more often. He no longer felt dizzy or nauseous, though he still truly loathed the feeling. Harry glanced around and found himself standing on a dark, forest road just outside a small village. He could see a few houses, with cheerful lights in the windows just a short way away from where he stood. "Sir, where are we?" Harry asked. For some bizarre reason, he felt very nervous as he looked down that road at those warm, invitingly lit windows. "Harry, I have brought you here tonight because I felt it was time. To be quite honest, you have been ready to come here for a long time. I, on the other hand, was blinded by my wish to keep you innocent. Even after all you have been through and accomplished, it was still my desire for you to have a real childhood. It is now clear that that was an impossibility. Though there is no excuse for keeping you away. Harry, we are here to visit the resting place of your mother and father." Harry's eyes were tearing up before the headmaster had finished his speech. On some level, Harry knew the moment they had operated onto that road. He would never be able to explain how he knew, but he did. He looked up at the old man, and tried to express his emotions, but his throat was too constricted for any words to come out. "This way," Dumbledore said, giving Harry an understanding nod. Harry wanted to run to his parents' graves, even though he had no idea where they were buried. Dumbledore led them down that dark country road towards the town. They passed the first house, and Harry glimpsed a middle-aged woman in her kitchen washing dishes. She looked up as he and Dumbledore passed, but appeared not to have noticed them. "Sir, I have placed a notice me not charm on the two of us. It would not do for people to question our appearance this evening." Harry nodded and followed the headmaster. It was a short journey to a small church, which sat at the end of a lowly lit lane. The building was white, though the paint was peeling. Harry noticed a large stained glass over the door depicting an angel looking over that very church. Dumbledore opened the gate and waited for Harry to step through before shutting it again. They walked behind the ancient-looking church and Harry saw hundreds of headstones of different sizes and shapes. "It was decided that your mother and father be laid to rest here, near to your grandparents. Several other members of the Potter line are here, as well as members of my own family." Harry looked up at Dumbledore suddenly. The headmaster happened to turn back, and gave a weak smile. "Sir, are we related?" Harry asked, thinking of the family tree that Sirius had at Grimmauld Place. He had learned that a great many wizard families were related in some way. To my knowledge, no, we are not. Though, I have not truly researched my family line. I suppose anything is possible. Harry nodded. He wasn't sure if he felt relief or sadness that he and the headmaster did not share a familial bond. Though, he supposed it didn't matter. The headmaster had at least attempted to be a guiding force in his life, and just as a real parent or family member, the man had made mistakes. Here we are, Dumbledore said, stopping before a large headstone. Harry turned to look at the final resting place of his parents. He had imagined several times over the years what it might feel like to be here, but nothing compared to actually standing before it. Harry felt suddenly weak, and he knelt in front of the polished marble stone, and tentatively reached out his fingers to touch the names. James Potter, Lily Potter. Born March 27, 1960. Born January 30, 1960. Died October 31, 1981. Died October 31, 1981. Harry's eyes stung with tears, and his head fell as his feelings overtook him. It was the worst Harry could ever remember feeling, and at the same time, he was thankful to be there. They were extraordinary people. Dumbledore said, his voice soft. I know you've heard many stories by now, and it is a shame that the only way you will ever know them is through the memories of others. Why did they hide here? Harry asked, wiping at his eyes. It was my choice. Your father had suggested a small hideaway in Scotland. However, your mother wished to remain close to your aunt. Lily was hopeful that she could reconcile their relationship. She tried many times to reach out to your Aunt Petunia, and I know it always broke her heart when she did not reply. Harry stood up, never taking his eyes from the headstone. Thank you, sir, this really meant a lot to me to come here. Harry said, his voice gruff as he was trying to keep from crying. We are in no rush, Harry. I shall give you a few moments to yourself, as I have someone I would very much like to visit. When you are ready, I shall be nearby. Harry heard the headmaster shuffle off. Harry suddenly felt awkward as he stared at his parents' grave. He'd seen once on one of Dudley's teleprograms that the character had spoken to the graves of people he'd lost as if they could hear him. He didn't know why, but somehow, it seemed a comforting thought. Hi, Mom, Dad. It's me, Harry. I wish I could have come here sooner, though I don't know what it would have helped. I miss you both. Harry's eyes filled with tears once again, and he didn't try to stop them. I wish you were both here. It might make things easier. Though, I suppose if you were here, I might not be in the spot I'm in. But, I'm not alone. Sirius is with me, and Remus, too. Plus, I've got some really good friends. Hermione is really smart, and just an amazing person. She's never once doubted me. And Neville. He's amazing, really. Tracy, Dad, you'd like her. Sirius says she would have been a great marauder. She's really loyal, and brilliant. And I'm in love, too. Daphne, she's... Gods, there are no words that even come close. I know you'd both love her. I haven't really dated anyone else, but somehow, things just feel right with her, like it's meant to be or something. But, who knows, right? Harry wiped his eyes, but the tears continued. It's so. I don't know how I'm going to do what I have to do. I know that I'm getting stronger, and I'm learning a lot, but I just don't feel like it's going to be enough. But I can't give up. I won't. So, either I'm going to beat him, and send him to hell where he belongs, or... I guess I'll be with you soon. Harry's sadness began to melt away and he was filled with a fiery determination. Too many people had lost families at the hands of Lord Voldemort, and Harry was destined to end the suffering. Now, as he stood before his parents' resting place, Harry wanted nothing more than to face Voldemort right then and there and end his miserable excuse for a life. If the Dark Lord had appeared before him right in that moment, Harry was sure the fight would be over before it began. I should go, but I promise that I'll come back soon. Please say hello to Ron, and tell him how much I miss him. It's been a long time since I've had a good Quidditch conversation. Harry chuckled. He took a deep, soothing breath, and wiped his eyes one more time, before turning to look for Dumbledore. The headmaster was standing about 50 feet away in front of a small grave. Harry walked over quietly, wishing not to disturb Dumbledore. The headmaster sensed Harry's presence, however, and turned to speak to the younger man. "My younger sister, Ariana," Dumbledore said, a hitch in his voice. "She died as a result of my own stupidity and pride." Harry looked up questioningly, and Dumbledore gave a watery smile. "She was accosted by some very young Muggle boys, and as a result, she was never able to control her magic. She was unsafe to be allowed around other children, and never got to go to school. My mother took care of her until her death, and I took over. However, I was careless, and in my foolishness, Ariana came to harm. I still have no idea if it was I who caused her death, or if it was just." "I'm so sorry, sir," Harry said, feeling the elder man's pain. "Life is full of choices, Harry. I tried to take the easy path, and my sister suffered for it. My brother has never forgiven me, and even now we have a difficult relationship. Since that day, I have never once taken the easy path, no matter how difficult it promised to be. Even in regards to the choices I made concerning you." Harry looked up puzzled, and Dumbledore turned and began leading them out of the graveyard. "It was never easy deciding what to do with you. I have told you already that my biggest mistake was not beginning your training earlier, but I felt it the best for you to be allowed to be as normal a teenager as possible. Even after you faced Lord Voldemort in your first year, I refused to believe it was impossible for you to have some kind of childhood. What about after second year?" Dumbledore chuckled. "I have no further excuses, Harry. What matters is you're trying to correct your mistakes, Sir." Harry smiled, letting the old man off the hook. "It would be very easy for you to be angry with me, Harry," Dumbledore remarked. "But it wouldn't be right," Harry said. "I know now that you just wanted what was best for me. Everyone did. Everyone wanted to protect me, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's what you do for people you care about. It's what I tried to do with my friends. But, I understand now that sometimes, you have to accept that you can't always protect the people you care about, and they need to make their own decisions." "Very wise, Harry. Very wise, indeed. However, it is getting late, and we have one more thing to do here tonight, before we go back to Hogwarts. We'd best be moving along. This way, Harry." Together, Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore left that peaceful graveyard and headed back down the darkened road that had brought them there. The Halloween feast was one of the best of the year, and every single student was in attendance that evening to enjoy the annual festivities, and more importantly, the food. Every student, that is, except 3. Daphne Greengrass knew why her boyfriend wasn't there tonight, but she had noticed the very obvious absence of Draco Malfoy, and Theodore not. She kept turning her head up and down the Slytherin table thinking she had just missed them, and they were along the table somewhere. As one of the special feasts of the year, students were required to stay at their own house tables. Neither Daphne or Tracy were truly enjoying the feast, as they truly wanted to celebrate with their friends at the Gryffindor table. Over the past couple of weeks, she had become increasingly curious as to why Draco Malfoy had broken into her trunk, and what exactly he had been looking for. Though she was sure her suspicions were spot on, she wanted to be sure. She had noticed that Draco disappeared for long periods of time, even skiving off classes. She had also noticed that Draco had developed a strange new mannerism. On the rare occasions that she did see him in the common room, he would often rub the inside of his left forearm. "What's with you?" Tracy Davis asked from across the table, as she reached for a bit more fudge cake. "You've been eyeballing everyone at this table all night. Who are you looking for?" Millicent Bulstrode, who had joined them for the feast, looked up curiously at this comment. I don't know." Daphne shook her head. "Have either of you noticed how weird Malfoy's been acting?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, besides using Polyjuice Potion to badly impersonate your sister and go through your things," Tracy asked. "He's up to something. I know he wanted to get his hands on the luck potion, but I have no idea why. What I do know is that it isn't just to get one over on Harry. It's something bigger. I mean, why else would he skive off classes?" "That's a good point," Millicent said, jumping into the conversation. "You'd think he'd want to learn all he could, so he might be able to best Harry at magic at least. Have either of you seen how he favors his left arm?" Daphne asked conspiratorially. Tracy gave a look of skepticism while Millicent looked contemplative. "Oh, come on," Tracy said, waving her hand as if warding off a fly. "Do you honestly think that you know who would have recruited Draco? He's a bigger peacock than his father." "Who is a Death Eater?" Millicent pointed out. Tracy opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The blonde girl looked between Millicent and Daphne. "Okay. Fine, I'll play along," Tracy said, placing her fork down and leaning on her elbows. "Let's just say that Draco is marked. Don't you think he would have used it by now to pull everyone in Slytherin back under his thumb?" "What if he's not allowed to say anything?" Daphne asked. "What if he isn't the only one in the house? You heard Sir Padfoot this summer. You know who doesn't trust anyone, and if he put a spy in Hogwarts, he'd likely put a backup to watch over the first to make sure he didn't slip up. And let's face it, Draco is the biggest braggart we've ever known. It all fits. Even with his father in prison, he'd still try and assert himself. It's more likely he would have tried to get out of his father's shadow," Millie pointed out. "It would have been the perfect time to do that, and prove to everyone he's superior to his father. So, if he is marked, what is his mission?" Tracy asked. "Obviously, it would be to deliver Harry," Millie said, as if it were in fact that obvious. "No, I don't think so. There's no way Draco could even get close to Harry, and I think you know who would already know that." Daphne shook her head. She looked across the Great Hall to the Gryffindor table, wondering where her boyfriend had gone to that night. He had told her that afternoon when he'd gotten the note from the headmaster that he had been asked to join Dumbledore for something special. Daphne was worried for Harry, and it was driving her mad that she had no idea where he was. "No, whatever he's supposed to do, I don't think Harry's a part of it. At least, not a major part of it." "Then, what?" Tracy asked, now sounding more convinced. "Well, there's only one other person here that you know who would want dead." Millicent smiled, folding her napkin and placing it on her plate right before it disappeared. "Okay, now you're barking." Tracy smiled. "Like Draco would even have a chance against Dumbledore." "No, of course not. Daphne agreed. Dumbledore would wipe the floor with Malfoy before he could even get his wand up. But a straight-on duel isn't the only way to hurt someone. And maybe that's why he needed the luck potion. Maybe he's working on some kind of curse, or something. Something that he could use on Dumbledore without actually having to face him. Tracy seemed to think on that for a few moments. It was pretty well known throughout Slytherin House that the Malfoys had a very extensive library on the dark arts. It was possible that Draco could have spent the summer reading up and trying to come up with a way to eliminate the headmaster, while seemingly keeping his hands clean. And, it was true that Draco, though fairly incompetent, was also one of the most cunning in the entire Slytherin house. Unfortunately for the former Prince of Slytherin, his ego often got in the way of his deviousness. "Okay," she said finally. "So, what do you want to do?" Daphne looked up, and Tracy saw doubt in her best friend's eyes. "I don't know. I mean, what if I'm just..." "Daphne, I've known you pretty much my whole life. If you think the ferret is up to something, then I believe you. I say we try and at least find out what it is." Daphne smiled thankfully at her best friend. Millicent nodded as well, signaling that she was with them. Daphne breathed a relieved sigh, as now she had unloaded her burden of suspicion, and her friends had believed her. Now, she felt her next move was to confide in her boyfriend. Harry took in the sight of the broken-down house, with one corner of the second floor having been blown out from the inside. He knew at once that this had been the house where his mother and father had met their fate. The air all around him seemed heavy, and dark. Very slowly, he passed through the low gate and into the once vibrant yard of his parents' home. It had been such an emotional experience for him to visit the graves of his parents, but stepping into the house where they had died was nothing short of traumatic. Harry could barely breathe as his fingertips touched the cold metal of the doorknob, and slowly pushed the door open. Dumbledore stood right behind him, keeping himself reverently silent as the young man made his way through the dilapidated house. Harry was actually surprised that the house was still standing. From all he had heard over the years, he had thought it was nothing more than a pile of rubble. Yet, here it stood, neglected, dirty, and rotting, but standing, nonetheless. Harry swore he could feel echoes of his mother and father. He felt he could hear laughter, and whispers as he stepped into the sitting room. He saw the dirty furniture, and his heart gave a lurch. "I thought it was all gone," Harry said, his voice hoarse with grief and joy. Many of their things were taken by unsavory people, hoping to make a bit of gold for the historical value. Though, myself and Hagrid, and a few others, were able to get our hands on more than a handful of trinkets and get them placed inside the Potter vaults, where they await you upon your next birthday. Harry turned in surprise. "I thought I only had one vault." Many families establish trust vaults for their children when they are born. They are there to cover the costs of schooling. "Your Miss Greengrass has one, as well as Mr. Longbottom?" "How do you know that?" Harry asked, not really sure if he cared. "As headmaster, I receive a yearly statement from Gringotts, which tells me which students' tuitions are paid and which are outstanding. I believe that I mentioned this to you at the beginning of this past summer." Harry remembered how Dumbledore had all but told his aunt and uncle that he was extremely rich. Harry had been surprised to learn that fact for himself, though he still had no idea just how much he had. "Now is not the time for this. You will get all the information upon your 17th birthday. For now, we have another matter to see to this evening, and it is getting rather late. I am deeply sorry to have to ask this, as I am sure you would like to see more of this place, but time is against us, I'm afraid. Up the stairs, if you will, Harry." Harry nodded, and turned to leave the sitting room. As he began to climb the steps, he felt as if he were passing through a curtain of ice and electricity. He felt his skin crawl while his nerves hummed. "Sir," Harry said as he passed the first 2 steps and the feeling disappeared. "There." He pointed. It felt cold, and at the same time painful. Like someone was using the cruciatus or something. Dumbledore gave a sad smile and nodded. "I think you are right. I believe that spot was where my dad was killed. That was his magic." "Voldemort's, I mean." "Not all of it. To your right, please." Harry looked confused, but followed Dumbledore's instruction. Harry climbed the steps and turned to his right. There was no question where he was going, as he could see that the walls were gone, and there was barely anything left of the floor. Harry and Dumbledore could only take a few steps into what was left of Harry's nursery. Harry could see the steeple of the church where his parents were laid to rest over the tops of the trees. As he passed into the room, he felt the same cold tightness in the air, mixed with something else entirely. This was familiar, and soothing. "My mother died here," he said, mostly to himself. "He killed here, right here, while she tried to protect me. I can feel it, the magic she invoked, I've felt it all my life whenever I've thought of her. That is part of why I placed you with your relatives. What you felt was her magic, protecting you. You've been able to feel her residual magic all this time, though you didn't know it," Dumbledore said softly. "I can feel his magic as well. It's cold. It feels wrong, somehow. Unnatural, almost. Very impressive, Harry. You are correct. Lord Voldemort has, as he has boasted many times, gone far beyond anyone else into the realm of dark magic. It changes a person from the inside, and leaves its foulness on them, even upon their magic. There was a time, long ago, when his magic was not so different from your own." Harry turned a disbelieving eye to his headmaster, who looked very serious. Had he made different choices, knew what it was to feel loved? If his mother had not been so sick and weak when she gave birth to him and raised him with the love that your own mother felt for you, perhaps things would have been very different. Harry nodded his understanding. He stood in silence for another moment, trying to picture his mother putting him in his crib, and making sure he was warm enough before kissing his unblemished forehead good night. Tears once again formed in his eyes, stinging them. "I want to go," he whispered. Dumbledore nodded and led the young man out of that broken-down monument and back out onto the lane. "I am deeply sorry," Dumbledore began. "I'm not," Harry said, cutting the headmaster off. "I'm thankful to you for bringing me here tonight. It means a lot to me, truly. And I know why you needed to bring me here. It's the only place that you know of where his residual magic would be strong enough for me to sense. You're preparing me to hunt Horcruxes, aren't you? Now, Harry, we've discussed this at great length." "Yes, sir, and you've said much more with what you don't actually say. You want to have all the Horcruxes destroyed before I face him, yet you never say that it would be you who destroys them. You said that you're getting on, and with what you've been teaching me, it just makes sense that you're trying to prepare me to go after the ones you don't find." Dumbledore's smile came back to his face quite proudly. "I am deeply impressed, Harry." Dumbledore gave a great sigh and finally nodded. "I am very hopeful that it will be me who destroys the rest of his accursed soul anchors, but fate may have other plans for me." "Fate, or Voldemort, sir?" Again, Dumbledore smiled. Harry waited for a response, but Dumbledore remained silent. Harry realized that Dumbledore was hiding something, and Harry was sure it had to do with his lifespan. Harry felt a stab of pain at the thought of Dumbledore's life ending, even though he understood how the elder man felt about life and death. "How many are left?" Harry asked, changing the subject. "4. At least, I am sure there are only 4 left. It is possible that there are more." But, he felt 7 was the most powerful magical number. Harry said, remembering what he had seen in the pensive memories over the summer. That, he did. "Do you have an idea of what they are, or where they might be?" Harry asked. "I have a very good idea of what they are, as should you." "As for where they are?" Dumbledore shrugged half-heartedly. Harry thought for a few moments, trying to recall what he could from all those pensive memories. Voldemort had felt very strongly about the founders of Hogwarts, and as a descendant of Salazar Slytherin himself, he felt that any relics of the founders belonged to him. Harry remembered Dumbledore telling him that he had found the first Horcrux in the hut of Voldemort magical relatives. A place that the Dark Lord would likely feel a strong connection to. "Sir, do you think it's possible that Voldemort would have hidden a Horcrux inside the school?" Dumbledore nodded. "I believe he has indeed, though I am quite unsure of where it could be hidden." "What about the Chamber of Secrets?" Harry asked. "It is likely the most obvious spot, especially as no one could enter there." I would be happy to bring you down there so we can search," Harry said. Dumbledore nodded, smiling. "I had already planned on asking you to do just that. However, it may be hidden somewhere else entirely. The castle is quite large and no one alive knows all her secrets, not even me. Lord Voldemort was one of a very select few who had explored her enough to discover places long forgotten. Even if we don't find a Horcrux in the chamber, there are still many more places it might be hidden. I feel I am close to yet another location, as well. Perhaps, if luck is with us, we might be able to finish them all off before the school year is at an end." Dumbledore's confident smile did not reach his eyes, and Harry felt that the headmaster was being a bit vague. Harry felt a weight in his stomach, as he began to imagine what might lay ahead for him. He knew that he had the support of his friends, and that he could count on them all, but what he would not have would be the insurmountable power and knowledge of Albus Dumbledore to help him. Eventually he would have to face his fate alone. Only then would he discover just what kind of wizard, what kind of man, Harry Potter truly was. Please like and subscribe.